For months, we all looked at the 2024 Baltimore bridge collapse as just this catastrophic, seemingly spontaneous mechanical failure, right? I mean, a massive ship lost power, a bridge fell, and a major city was basically paralyzed. But today, that whole narrative has been completely upended. We're not just looking at twisting metal, stranded cargo, and the devastating physical aftermath of an accident anymore. We are now looking at incredibly serious, newly announced legal fallout. It's a massive shift. We've gone from a complex investigation of a maritime tragedy straight into formal, high-stakes allegations of a major corporate crime. The scope and the gravity of this story have completely changed.
Just listen to the sheer force of the language U.S. prosecutors are using here. It really draws a hard line in the sand. They stated, quote, "This indictment should send a message to all ship operators that circumventing safety requirements and breaking U.S. laws will not be tolerated." Let that sink in for a second. That word, indictment, changes absolutely everything. It explicitly frames this event not as some terrible stroke of bad luck or a weird technological glitch, but as the direct, devastating result of alleged intentional choices to bypass standard maritime safety. Make no mistake, this is a powerful warning shot fired directly across the bow of the entire global maritime industry.
All right, so that brings us to Section 1, the criminal charges. Let's formally examine exactly what has just happened on the legal front.
So here's the fundamental shift we're dealing with. U.S. prosecutors have officially laid criminal charges in connection with the 2024 collapse. The legal landscape has literally transformed overnight, going from preliminary damage assessments and emergency clearing of the shipping channel to a full-blown federal prosecution. Authorities have been meticulously reviewing the voyage data recorders, the maintenance logs, and the internal communications, and they've decided the evidence absolutely warrants criminal prosecution. What this means is that specific corporate entities, namely the owner and the management company, along with key personnel, are now facing the full weight of the U.S. justice system. They're invoking powerful legal mechanisms designed to hold operators strictly accountable when their vessels cause catastrophic harm in navigable waters.
But before we get deeper into the intricate legal paperwork and the mechanics of the specific allegations, we have to look at Section 2, the tragic collapse.
6. It's a stark, heavy number. 6 people died in this event. These were men who were simply out working the night shift, patching potholes on a vital piece of infrastructure, when their entire world collapsed underneath them. You know, it's incredibly important that whenever we get into the weeds of federal indictments and complex international shipping regulations, we do not lose sight of that profound human cost. 6 lives were lost instantly in an event that, according to these new findings by prosecutors, literally never had to happen.
Just to briefly recount the physical mechanics of that dark morning, a massive cargo ship completely lost power and slammed directly into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. We're talking about a gigantic vessel, fully loaded with thousands of containers, going completely dead in the water and drifting unpowered right into a critical load-bearing pillar. For a long time, the public focus was totally consumed by that sudden, catastrophic power loss. But as we dig into the prosecutor's findings, we really have to look past the blackout itself and examine the very human operational decisions that were allegedly happening behind the scenes long before that ship ever left the port.
And that brings us to the absolute core of the prosecutor's case in Section 3. Decisions and cover-up. This whole event is really defined by a shocking duality. The public accident we all watched on the news was a cargo ship losing power and striking the bridge. That narrative implies a passive, unstoppable chain of events, right? Like some unforeseeable mechanical ghost in the machine. But the hidden allegation uncovered by federal investigators paints a vastly different picture. Their case points directly at the vessel's Singapore-based operator and a senior employee. The allegation here is that they made critical, deliberate decisions regarding the maintenance and electrical systems of that ship that directly led to the crash. And then, perhaps the most shocking part of the whole shebang, they allegedly engaged in an orchestrated effort to cover up the true cause. We're talking about a massive structural pivot from a story of spontaneous power failure to a story of deliberate concealment. Let's break down exactly what investigators are actually alleging here, step by step. First up, they claim the operators intentionally circumvented essential safety requirements. We are talking about standard, mandatory protocols meant to ensure a ship's electrical grid is redundant and stable before it navigates complex, high-traffic waterways. Second, in bypassing those protocols, they explicitly broke U.S. laws. Operating a commercial vessel in U.S. waters comes with strict federal compliance standards, and prosecutors are arguing these were knowingly flouted just to keep the ship moving and avoid costly delays. Third, investigators say they made active, critical decisions, like allegedly ignoring glaring warnings about the power system's instability, and those became the direct crash-causing actions. And finally, the escalation. After the damage was done, after the bridge was literally at the bottom of the Patapsco River, they allegedly engaged in a cover-up. This wasn't just staying quiet. Prosecutors imply there were active attempts to obscure maintenance records and downplay the known electrical failures prior to the voyage. It is a damning sequence that paints a picture of systemic negligence followed by deliberate, calculated deception.
Now let's move to Section 4, the multi-billion impact, to discuss the staggering secondary fallout. $7 billion. According to the investigation, this collision caused at least $7 billion in damage. And honestly, that is just the minimum estimated dollar amount. When a vital artery of commerce and transportation, like the Francis Scott Key Bridge, is completely destroyed, the ripple effects are just monumental. We're looking at the massive cost of rebuilding the bridge, the enormous expense of the salvage and cleanup operation, the devastating economic hit to the port of Baltimore, which sat totally paralyzed for weeks, and the widespread disruption to global supply chains. When you put that staggering $7 billion figure right next to the allegations of intentionally circumventing safety requirements and covering up known electrical issues, the sheer magnitude of the alleged corporate recklessness comes into sharp, terrifying focus.
Which leaves us with this final, critical question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. Will these indictments actually change how global ship operators handle safety? Look, we have 6 lives lost, we have at least $7 billion in devastating economic damage, and now we have U.S. prosecutors issuing a severe, highly public warning laying formal criminal charges against a Singapore-based operator and a senior employee for breaking laws and attempting to cover it up. The stakes have been raised to the absolute maximum. Is this massive, tragic wake-up call enough to permanently stop the maritime industry from circumventing safety requirements in the future? Will the threat of federal prosecution finally outweigh the financial incentive to cut corners? It's a question that the entire global supply chain and honestly, anyone who ever drives over a major bridge urgently needs an answer to. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the world around you.